Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're glad you could join us as we explore this stack of sources you've shared.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Our mission today, like always, is to really unpack everything you've given us, cut through the noise, and get straight to the essential knowledge and insights.
That's right. We're here to guide you through this material, pull out what's most important, and, try to connect some of the dots presented in the sources themselves.
And today, our deep dive takes us into a really specific moment. Updates from CNN, all from Friday, June 6, 2025. It's just one day's worth of reporting.
But it's packed. Major political, economic developments. It's quite a snapshot.
Absolutely. So our mission really is to navigate these updates, which seem interconnected in some ways, pull out those critical details, understand the different, sometimes conflicting perspectives the sources present.
And see how these events, which might seem separate at first glance, maybe fit into a bigger picture based on what CNN reported that day.
Okay, these sources cover a lot. We've got high-profile feuds, big policy debates, administration actions.
A whole range, so let's just jump right in.
Okay, let's start with, well, probably the most eye-catching story in your sources.
Yeah.
This pretty dramatic public spat between President Trump and Elon Musk happened yesterday, apparently.
Yeah, and what jumps out right away in the source material is how this very public fight seems to have started over a specific policy issue.
Right. Musk's criticism of Trump's massive tax and domestic policy agenda bill.
Exactly. That seems to be the spark, according to the reporting.
And the source gives us Trump's reaction, telling CNN he's, quote, not even thinking about Musk. Says Musk has a problem and declared he won't be speaking to him for a while. That's pretty blunt.
Very direct language reported there. And meanwhile, the source mentions that behind the scenes, allies of both men were apparently trying to quietly broker a truce.
Trying to smooth things over.
Yeah.
But then, this is where the sources say things got really sharp, really personal.
Yeah.
The reported picking point, the thing that made those mediators feel like there was no going back, was Musk's post on X, the one referencing the Epstein files and addressing Trump directly. The source really flags that specific post as the moment it just escalated way beyond policy.
Wow. Okay, so that reference, coming after the policy disagreement, that really seems to have shifted the whole dynamic, according to the material.
Yeah, definitely dialed it up. And we see reactions documented right across the political spectrum in your sources. What about lawmakers? How did they respond, according to the reporting?
Well, you had House Majority Leader Steve Scalise calling it unfortunate, but he also denied it actually impacted the vote on that big agenda bill.
Okay, trying to keep the focus on the legislation.
Right. And House Speaker Mike Johnson, he seemed a bit more optimistic, saying maybe it could be salvaged. He mentioned texting Musk.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but he also made a comment contrasting, the craft of legislation with building rockets. A bit of a subtle jab, maybe.
Maybe. Then you had others expressing more direct concern.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Rep. Michael McCall reportedly worried it was just a distraction and hoped they'd reconcile. But then you get a perspective like Rep. Thomas Massey, who actually voted against the bill.
Okay, what did he say?
The source quotes him saying Musk's opposition probably changed the bill's trajectory because, and this is a direct quote from the source, people trust the guy who can land rockets backwards more with the math than they do the politicians.
Wow, that's quite a statement about public trust right there.
It really is. A very pointed assessment reported in the source. And then Rep. Chip Roy also quoted, he just seemed focused on the bill itself and what happens next in the Senate.
Okay, so a range of reactions in Congress. What about inside the administration, based on this material?
Well, White House advisor Peter Navarro's take, as reported, was pretty dismissive, actually.
Dismissive how?
He's quoted calling the whole feud inconsequential, referred to Musk as a special government employee with an expiration date who just happened to leave the administration last week.
Oof, okay.
And Navarro also apparently took the chance to criticize Musk's long-held opposition to tariffs, according to the source, so using it as an opportunity there.
Interesting. And the source even notes Russia weighing in.
Yeah, kind of unexpectedly. A senior lawmaker, Dmitry Novikov, reportedly joked about offering Musk asylum.
Seriously?
Asylum. Joked about it, yeah. And Dmitry Medvedev apparently joked about a peace deal. The Kremlin spokesperson officially called it an internal U.S. matter, but the source points out that comparisons started popping up in Russia, like in meme form. Comparisons to historical Russian feuds like Putin and Prigozhin, or even Stalin and Yesov.
Wow, okay. That adds another layer.
It does, but maybe more tangible are the potential consequences for Musk's businesses that are highlighted in the source material.
Right, the reporting mentions Trump reportedly threatened to, quote, terminate Elon's governmental subsidies and contracts.
Yeah, and that's potentially huge. The source breaks down what that could mean, especially for Tesla.
How so?
It specifically calls out Tesla's reliance on policies like the $7,500 EV tax credit, and also the market for regulatory credits. That's been a big revenue stream for them. The source says over $8 billion in sales in just 6 years.
$8 billion.
Yeah. And the suggestion in the reporting is that this market could be hit hard if Trump rolls back emissions standards or, takes away states' power to set their own tougher standards.
So this shows, based on the source, how a personal political fight at the very top could, potentially directly hit specific industry subsidies, market mechanisms.
Exactly. Things tied directly to environmental and energy policy. It connects the personal to the policy implications.
And maybe a more symbolic turn documented in the source. Trump's reported plan to get rid of his red Tesla.
The one he just bought in March.
That's the one. A senior White House official is quoted saying it might be sold or given away, though it was apparently still parked at the White House that morning. You might remember the source reminds us he reportedly bought that car and a Cybertruck for his granddaughter after that whole event where he turned the South Lawn into basically a Tesla showroom back in March.
Right. I remember that reporting. So quite a swing. From showroom display to reported threats impacting the business and wanting rid of the car.
It's a sharp turnaround presented in the source. Okay,
yeah.
Let's circle back to that agenda bill itself, the thing that apparently sparked this feud in the first place.
A really big one, yeah. Your source estimates this bill would add about $2.4 trillion to the deficit over the next decade.
$2.4 trillion. And this is where that reported feud might actually intersect with policy outcomes, right? The source shows differing views from lawmakers on whether the fight is actually impacting the bill's chances.
Exactly. You have, as reported, House leaders like Scalise and Johnson saying, no impact, we're unified, we'll get it to Trump's desk by July 4th.
Okay, projecting confidence.
But then you also have quotes from conservative lawmakers like Massey again and McCall warning that, well, actually, Musk's opposition in this drawn-out fight are having an impact.
Or could lead to buyer's remorse, I think was the phrase McCall used.
Right, especially about the financial side of things. The math, as Massey put it earlier.
So, real questions being raised, according to the source.
And if we dig a bit deeper into the details of this bill, the source includes quite a bit on its potential impact on Medicaid.
Okay, Medicaid. How so?
It draws on a couple things. A KFF poll, that's the Kaiser Family Foundation. They focus on health policy, and also a CBO estimate. The CBO is the Congressional Budget Office, nonpartisan budget analysis.
Got it. And this part really gets into the reported human side of the policy changes.
It does. That KFF poll cited found that just over half of Americans are concerned the Medicaid cuts in the bill would actually hurt their own family's ability to get and afford health care.
Over half. That's a significant number.
And what's really interesting from the source is how that breaks down by political party.
Okay.
I mean, sure, Democrats and independents, they were more likely to be worried. That's maybe expected.
Right.
But nearly 1/3 of Republicans also said they were concerned specifically for their own families about these potential Medicaid cuts.
Wow, okay. Nearly 1/3 of Republicans concerned for their own families. That's notable from the poll.
It is, and the source lists some specific Medicaid provisions reportedly in the bill. Things like bringing in work requirements for the first time, checking if people are still eligible more often, penalizing states if they use state money to cover undocumented immigrants, and limiting how states can tax healthcare providers.
So some major structural changes proposed there.
And the KFF poll, as reported, also found about 70% of all respondents were concerned these spending cuts would just lead to more people being uninsured.
70%.
Yeah, and also negatively affect local healthcare providers, hospitals, nursing homes. And again, even among Republicans, 43%, according to the poll, shared that specific concern about local providers being hit.
So concern crossing party lines there about the impact on local healthcare infrastructure.
Seems so, based on the poll results in the source. And then you have the CBO estimate cited.
What did that say?
It's pretty stark. Nearly 11 million more people would be uninsured in the year 2034 under this bill.
11 million more.
That's the CBO projection reported here. The source does add the context that the bill is now in the Senate and changes are expected there.
Okay.
And it mentions that some GOP senators already have concerns about how these Medicaid measures might impact people back home, their constituents, and those local providers we just talked about.
Right. And the source reminds us, contextually, that over 71 million Americans are currently enrolled in Medicaid. So the stakes are very high.
Extremely high. So yeah, this one piece of legislation kind of caught up in this high-profile feud has potentially huge ramifications, according to these sources, for millions of people's healthcare and the stability of local healthcare systems.
Okay. So beyond that feud and the big agenda bill, your sources from that Friday cover several other pretty significant administration actions reported that day.
Yeah, a few other key things happening. First up, something involving the Department of Education. The Trump administration reportedly filed an emergency appeal to the Supreme Court. They want permission to go ahead with mass layoffs at the department.
Mass layoffs. Why did they need the Supreme Court?
Because lower courts had apparently blocked the move. The reasoning reported was that, well, Congress created the department in the first place, so the executive branch couldn't just dismantle it through layoffs like that.
Okay, a separation of powers issue. So what's the administration arguing to the Supreme Court, according to the source?
They're framing them as internal management decisions aimed at eliminating discretionary functions.
Discretionary functions.
Yeah, but the Department of Justice argument, as reported, clarifies they aren't trying to eliminate the department itself. They acknowledge only Congress can do that. They say they're just, reducing its size while staying committed to the functions legally required by statute.
Got it. A nuanced argument there. What else?
Next, a new travel ban. The source reports the State Department was sending out guidance to embassies and consulates worldwide.
Guidance on what?
On how to handle the administration's new travel ban, which was set to go into effect just a few days later on June 9th.
Okay, so practical implementation instructions. What did they say?
The cable, as reported, laid out specifics based on the date. Before June 9, posts should just continue normal visa processing for countries on the list.
Business as usual until the deadline.
Right. But after June 9, they should still schedule appointments, but visas would be refused for people from the 19 barred countries, unless they meet a specific exception.
Ah, the exceptions. Are they detailed?
Some are. The source also notes that visas already granted before June 9, but not yet actually in the person's passport, would also be canceled unless an exception applied.
Wow, okay, so what are some of those exceptions listed in the source?
It's quite a list. Includes dual nationals, diplomats, government officials, people working for international organizations, or NATO.
Okay, official capacities.
Right. Then there's a category for national interest exceptions, but the source says more details on that were still forthcoming at the time.
Vague, okay.
Also certain athletes, people applying for immediate family immigrant visas if they have proof, adoptions, and also Afghan and U.S. government SIVs, that's the special immigrant visas for Iraqis and Afghans who worked with the U.S.
Right, crucial category.
And ethnic or religious minorities facing persecution in Iran, plus anyone else who gets an approved national interest exception.
It's a pretty complex list. It really highlights the difficulty in applying such a broad ban, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And the source points out that key part of the national interest exceptions still needed clarification, which adds uncertainty.
Okay. Shifting gears now to the economy. The source covers President Trump publicly criticizing the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, and specifically its chair, Jerome Powell. This came right after the May jobs report, which was apparently pretty solid.
So good jobs numbers. But Trump wasn't happy with the Fed. What were his complaints, according to the reporting?
Well, on Truth Social, he reportedly called the Fed a disaster.
Strong words.
Claimed it was lagging behind the ECB, that's the European Central Bank, which had recently cut interest rates, I think the source said 8 times.
Okay.
Comparing them. And he urged the Fed to cut rates by a full point. Rocket fuel was the phrase reported.
Rocket fuel. Wow.
Yeah. He also reportedly claimed there was virtually no inflation anymore, and that Powell was costing our country a fortune because, quote, borrowing costs should be much lower. All caps in the quote.
Okay, so very direct pressure.
Yeah.
How does the source contrast that with what Fed officials were saying?
The source explains the Fed officials' reasoning for holding rates steady at that point. They reportedly wanted more clarity, first on Trump's own policies and how the economy was reacting to them.
Waiting to see the impact.
Right, and they noted that the labor market was resilient, solid hiring, low unemployment shown in that jobs report. That meant they could keep rates on hold. They didn't feel pressure to cut rates just to support the economy.
Because the economy seems strong enough on its own, job-wise.
Exactly. The source adds the context that the Fed had been on hold since January after making 3 cuts the previous year. And at that moment, the futures market was pricing in an expectation for the next cut, maybe in October.
So a disconnect between the president's demands and the Fed's stated approach based on the reporting.
A very clear one presented in the source. And one last economic note, China trade.
What about it?
White House advisor Peter Navarro is quoted expecting a trade meeting between the administration and Chinese officials, probably within 7 days.
Soon then. Why the optimism?
It apparently followed a Trump chief phone call the day before, which Navarro described as very good. He said they had a clear mandate and understanding coming out of that call.
Okay. Any indication who would be involved in the meeting?
Navarro mentioned the key economic team members likely to participate, himself, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, the Trade Representative Jameson Greer, or maybe even the president himself.
So high-level talks, potentially imminent, according to Navarro.
That was the expectation reported. And then there's one more legal challenge documented in the sources for that day. This one involves Harvard.
Harvard University, what's the issue?
Yes, a federal judge, U.S. District Judge Allison Burroughs, reportedly put a stop, at least temporarily, to a Trump administration attempt to block international students, specifically from attending Harvard.
Block them how?
The judge issued a temporary restraining order, or TRO, against a proclamation Trump had issued. That proclamation would have suspended international visas for new students planning to enroll at Harvard.
Just Harvard, or more broadly?
The reporting here focuses specifically on Harvard, as they were the ones challenging it in this case.
Okay. What was Harvard's argument in court, according to the source?
They argued the ban would cause immediate and irreparable injury, and that it violated the First Amendment. They also made a statement quoted in the source, "Without its international students, Harvard is not Harvard."
A strong statement on identity there. And the judge agreed to step in.
For now, yes. The source notes her reasoning for issuing the TRO right away was precisely that risk of immediate and irreparable injury before there is an opportunity to hear from all parties. So, pausing things until a proper hearing could be held, which was set for mid-June.
And this was part of an existing lawsuit.
Yeah, the source mentions it was an amendment added onto a lawsuit already in progress.
Wow. Okay. That really was quite a deep dive into just a single day's worth of news reports from your sources.
It really was.
I mean, we touched on everything from that really high-profile political clash between Trump and Musk.
Or it's spilling out very publicly.
The huge policy debates like that agenda bill and its potential ripple effects on Medicaid. Then major administrative moves, the Education Department layoffs attempt, the new travel ban guidance.
Don't forget the economic commentary, Trump hitting the Fed, the potential China trade talks.
And these legal challenges, like the one with Harvard's international students, or the Education Department case going to the Supreme Court.
It really does underscore how exploring source material like this, even from just one day, lets you see the sheer amount of activity happening.
Yeah, and the connections, maybe unexpected connections, and just the complexity of it all across different branches of government, different sectors of society.
All unfolding simultaneously, as presented in this reporting snapshot from June 6th.
So, thinking about all this, what's maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to take away and consider? Based only on the source material we've discussed today, well, perhaps reflect on how quickly relationships, especially at the highest levels of politics, can apparently shift.
Yeah, like the Trump-Musk dynamic described.
Exactly. And how those shifts can potentially ripple out and impact areas that seem unrelated at first, like, specific business interests or even the trajectory of major policy debates. That's one angle suggested by the reporting.
Or maybe consider how the different parts of the government, the executive branch pushing actions, Congress debating, the judiciary stepping in, even independent bodies like the Fed making their own calculations how they all interact.
Yeah, constantly pushing and pulling against each other based on the specific events covered in these sources today. Lots of checks and balances in action, or at least being tested.
It's certainly a lot to process from just one day's reporting, but hopefully this deep dive has helped give you a clearer picture of the key developments and the the various perspectives presented in the sources you provided us.
Absolutely. Thank you again for providing the sources, and thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.